This car, which just helped me make my coffee, is the Kia EV6, and I've been living with this one for 3 months, and what the computer tells me is 2,500 kilometers or 71.5 hours behind the wheel, or at least sitting in it. In that time, I've done a lot with this car. I've driven it long distances, I've tested out its range, I've seen what it's like to charge. To answer all your questions about whether the Kia EV6 is really a car that you could live with. Let's get into it. First up, let's talk about which version of the EV6 we've been living with and how much it costs. Now, the EV6 that I've been testing for this review is the GT line all-wheel drive, which is now the mid-spec version of the car, because up the top there's now a GT, which is even faster and even more powerful than this one, which is quite a feat because I can tell you this one's powerful enough as is. Now, it does cost something close to $90,000, so it's not your value EV. In fact, it's set to replace the Stinger as Kia's halo model. Despite its big upfront cost though, I would hardly say the EV6 is bad value. As we'll get into in a sec, it's a real head turner, and it's just a lot of car in terms of size, standard equipment, and performance. It's not the kind of car you're going to be comparing with the MG ZS EVs or even your Tesla Model 3s or Polestar 2s of the world. This is an EV which is in a tier above, and almost looks like it's ready to take sales from the more premium players, or the performance version of the Tesla Model Y, for example. The EV6 GT line gets pretty much all the kit. Highlights for me, of course, include that V2L external power supply, but also the big wheels, power tailgate, those big media screens in the interior, heated and cooled seats. It's got the lot. If you want to read the full set of standard equipment, check out our full written EV6 GT line review at carsguide.com.au. Things I wasn't as keen on include the seat trim, which is a kind of suede material which strikes me as hard to clean for longer term owners, and an abundance of hard plastic trims on the interior. You get used to the fact that they're there over the longer term, but when you compare the interior of this car to something like even its Ioniq 5 relation, they do become a bit more obvious. The EV6 has been around for a little while now in Australia, and despite the fact that the one I'm driving isn't the only one I've seen regularly around my area, it still manages to majorly turn heads in traffic. It's space age in terms of look and feel, and it really shakes the expectation of what an SUV can look like. To me, the EV6 doesn't really look like an SUV at all. It's so low and wide, and the roofline is so long, it's almost like a shooting brake or a Grand Tourer than a traditional SUV, and that's a very good thing. Even after all these months with the car, I still enjoy looking at it and finding new ways to appreciate it. One strange thing about the interior of this car is even though the car is huge, it feels kind of small in here. And I think that's down to the fact that it's got a really low roofline and a really high SUV-like seating position. And then there's all these dark trims to contend with, which make it feel kind of closed in. And I think that's deliberate. It has more of a performance car kind of feel than something like the Ioniq 5. But it's just worth noting that it's not really making or feeling like it's making the most of its huge footprint. There's still a lot of wow factor in here when it comes to design though. I love these huge screens in this curving panel. I love this weird two-spoke steering wheel. I love the way the dash has this sort of low set three-dimensional design with a nice soft touch kind of pattern to it. There's some really neat things too. This floating center console, it doesn't move back and forth like the one the Ioniq 5 does, but it's still full of storage and keeps all of your buttons and toggles within close reach. Then there's this cool panel here which can alternate between either controlling the climate functions or your multimedia functions, so you get double use out of these dials. That's kind of cool. Now, the only really notable downsides that come with this design is the fact that there's just an overuse of piano black everywhere, like in the door and in the center console and across these little trim pieces in the dash, and it's just impossible to keep clean, and it might get kind of annoying if you were actually living with this car. The other thing that I'm not sure about entirely is the suede trim on the seats, which is kind of hard to clean, and it's one of those things where if you own it and you've got kids or you've got a dog or something, it just, stuff gets caught in it and it's hard to clean out. And the one major downside with this car compared to the Ioniq 5 is it does use quite a lot more hard plastic than the Ioniq 5 or maybe another car that's at this price point as well. There's no kind of like soft trims on the side of this or here or anything. It is just like a hard kind of Kia plastic. That's a little bit of a shame. Let's hop in the back seat and talk a little bit more about practicality.
Now, the real highlight for me in my time with this car has been the back seat, because it's just so open and huge, and unlike the front seat, even though you've got all this dark trim, this just feels like a massive lounge chair to sit on because you've got this nice flat floor and all this space to work with. It's great. In fact, I use this car as a mobile office quite frequently because I've got a charging port down there. I can charge my laptop. I've got USB-C outlets. I can charge my phone. I can leave the car running. I can have the air conditioning on even when I'm charging the car. So that's really something that EVs have that combustion cars don't. And I love it back here.
EVs like this are quite versatile in that you don't really have to worry about running an engine or anything, and you can still use these powered features. The battery is so huge, you'll barely make a dent in it, even if you're running things off of it for like a whole day. The external port is quite powerful. It can output up to 2.4 kilowatts or so don't worry about blowing a fuse by running a kettle off of it. The possibilities with this thing are sort of endless. You could power a campground, power a market stall, or as I discovered when I was testing the Kia Niro Relation, which has the same feature, you can even charge up another EV with it. Very cool. One thing I have gotten a lot of use out of is the boot. It has 480 litres of space, which for context isn't perhaps as big as it could be, but for my purposes it seems to be plenty. But then I don't have kids or anything, so I don't need to use a pram or have a dog back there.
And yes, of course, like other EVs, the EV6 does get a frunk. But you know what? I find after having a couple of EVs, you don't really use this. Yes, it will hold my Type 2 charging cable, which I might use at a public charging outlet. But actually, because it's such a kerfuffle to open the bonnet and get it out and the charging ports on the other side of the car, I actually find it just easier to leave this on the back seat. The EV6 will travel a claimed 480 something kilometers on a single charge, and that's a lot. In fact, I don't even know what range anxiety is in this car. I hop in it, I don't really think about how much range it has, I don't think about where I need to charge it, I don't think about how long I need to charge it for, I don't think about the inconvenience of charging at all because I just drive it around in my day-to-day and I pick up charge here and there. It's almost like driving a petrol car.
I didn't really expect how much of a background thought range and charging would become in this car. I can't even charge it at home, although I do have both a slow AC charger and a fast DC charger nearby to me. Technically, the EV6 is one of the fastest charging EVs on the Australian market, able to charge up in under half an hour when using a 350 kilowatt charger. I can tell you firsthand though, you'll barely ever find one of these around Australia. My charging from 10% took about an hour and a half to get close to 100% on a local 50 kilowatt unit. On my local free AC charger, on the other hand, the 11 kilowatt rate meant an additional 70 kilometers or so per hour. I found this system was good to leave the car on during weekly grocery shops or visits to the gym.
I only really look at the range when it drops into the double digits and the car starts to tell me I've only got 10% battery left or something to that effect. It really is like driving a combustion car in terms of how often you fill it up. It's only once a week or once a fortnight in my general commuting. Now, I have travelled over my 3 months with the car about 2,500 Ks. And during that time, the car's consumed 17.5-ish kilowatt hours, which is less than the claim of 18. Now, that's interesting because it will actually exceed the range claim, but this car will go one step further, and I found that not only is it able to exceed its range claim, but will actually be super accurate even if you take it on the freeway, and not many EVs can do that. Now, just as we set off here, one thing I will point out about the EV6 straight away is that it is enormous. This is a big car. Yes, from the outside, it doesn't look that big. And yes, technically, dimensions-wise, it's only as big as a mid-size SUV. But it's the wheelbase that makes it hard to turn and move in low-speed, like parking scenarios. The wheelbase is the same, in fact, as a Hyundai Palisade. That's a big SUV. And it's all well and good if you've got your own driveway and garage to park this car in, but for me, parking in a unit-sized apartment block, I have to do about an 8-point turn to get the car in, and it just gets a bit jarring after 3 months. But one thing that massive wheelbase, the width of this car and the size of its tires add up to is something that's hugely capable, comfortable and confident on the road. Yes, we have a lot of power, but this car can really put it to the ground and it grabs on in corners as well, making for a car that's properly quick to drive. And this is one area where the EV6 sets itself apart majorly from the Ioniq 5. I've driven both cars quite a lot now, and the EV6 is definitely the performer of the two. It's much more serious on the road, its suspension is firmer, and it's really got a purposeful kind of nature to it. Whereas the Ioniq 5 is comfortable, a bit springy, a bit playful, but it's not as determined as the EV6 feels. Now the EV6 has been engineered really well, so even though it is quite stiff, almost to the point of being brittle, it manages to be comfortable enough. Now it is serious in the corners and it keeps everything under control, but it does have a little bit of jiggle factor, maybe because of that weight and how firm the chassis in this car is. It just sort of jiggles side to side when you hit some bumps, or maybe it's a speed bump or some corrugations on the road. It's not the most comfortable car, and again, not as comfortable as the Ioniq 5. But the trade-off is it does have that capability in those corners. So if you're looking for something that's more like a sports car, the EV6 is going to be for you. Now, a few other things to know about the EV6 drive experience. You do get some quite varied drive modes that will alter the steering quite a bit, because the steering's quite heavily assisted. So in a sort of default driving mode, it feels a little bit, I don't know, wishy-washy, but still enough control in those corners. And then as you go up, it sort of firms up a bit and makes the car feel as serious as it can be. Now, as an EV, things are different again. So you do have 4 regen braking modes. You can pretty much turn the regen off to drive it like a normal car might drive, or you can set it all the way to a single pedal driving mode. I really quite like the single pedal driving mode in all of these Kia and Hyundai EVs because it makes the car feel really efficient, and it really squeezes every last second out of the deceleration and puts that energy back in the battery. And that's probably part of the reason that this car has performed so well in its energy consumption. Now, over a longer term review, you do pick up a couple of little annoyances, and I have a few that I've picked up in this car. So one is the little turnstile shifter. You use that to change gears, but you've got to be kind of careful with it, because if you don't depress the brake pedal enough, it won't actually change gear. So if you're sort of in a tight parking situation, you've got to be careful that it hasn't left you in neutral or drive before you step on the accelerator expecting it to reverse. That's a little bit annoying. The other thing that I found annoying is when you put it in park, it doesn't automatically put the handbrake on. There might be a way to do this in the system, but I haven't been able to figure it out. And that's just a little annoyance, because the Nero that I had previously automatically put the handbrake on. Why doesn't this?
The EV6 wears a maximum 5-star ANCAP safety rating dating to the 2022 standards.
One thing I will call out when it comes to safety in the EV6 though is you live with the car for 3 months and you start to learn which systems are quite annoying. And I've got to say, the lane keep software in this particular car is really overzealous. It just pushes you back and forth in the lane, and sometimes it doesn't quite get it right and it tugs the steering wheel against you. And even sometimes you're holding the steering wheel and you're going straight and it tells you you're not holding the steering wheel, so you have to give it a little bit of resistance. It's just a little bit much, and I wish it wasn't so bad, because when you do put the cruise control on and you let it kind of help you with the steering, it's actually really quite nice. It's a shame it can't really strike a middle ground.
Of course, the EV6 has the same 7-year and unlimited kilometre warranty as the rest of the Kia range. The battery is covered for the same time, although is limited to 150,000 kilometres. When it comes to servicing, Kia offers prepaid packs for 3, 5 or 7 years, which work out at a reasonable cost per year.
I've loved living with the EV6, and I'm really going to miss this car. Yes, it's too big and probably too expensive for me personally, but that doesn't mean it's not an incredible car to own. It's massive, it's powerful, it's comfortable, and importantly, it has all of those key EV feature boxes ticked. And that really does add something to the formula. It's more than just a car. It becomes something a little bit extra. I love that about it. Remember to check out my full 3-chapter long-term review over at carsguide.com.au.